Okay, what's up, people? It's Friday. Oh my goodness, it's Friday. And you know what? I'm not the kind of guy that's like, oh, it's Friday or oh, it's Monday. I kind of feel like you should be loving what you do. And I hope everybody out there finds that for themselves, because it's truly an awesome thing to come in every day into work, no matter how sleepy you are, and know that you're pushing some kind of needle forward. So welcome to At the Gardens. My name is Garrett Wilhelm. I'm CEO of Creative Gardens Early Education and founder of both Creative Gardens Ashburn Village and the Ohana School. We are personalized education, learner-centric schools in the area, in the Northern Virginia area and beyond. And thank you so much for joining us today. As always, we have amazing people on the show to talk shop. And shop for me is education, kids products, anything that has to do in the realm of education and kids. And today is no different. So today I have a really awesome guest on, someone that's been a colleague of mine for a long time, and met her back in the alt school Silicon Valley days, and we can talk about that definitely when she jumps on. And yeah, she is the director of community for Higher Ground Education. And without further ado, I don't like to waste time. You guys listening to me, I have guests on for a reason. Welcome, Emily Greenburg. So hold on one second. Emily, welcome to At the Gardens.
So great to be here, Garrett. Thank you so much.
Yay. So first of all, Emily and I have been chatting quite a bit just in the past, a little bit about shop and talking about, progressive education in general and the importance of community and what community means nowadays, because I think it's definitely been redefined. So before we get into all the fantastic, great conversation, what I like to do for any one of my guests is just to kind of, if you could give us a little bit of an origin story about how you got to, first of all, who you are, and then how you got to education. I would love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hello, everybody. And again, happy Friday. My name is Emily. I'm coming to you from the New Jersey suburb called Westfield, where I live with my husband and 2-year-old son named James, and a dog that I hope you don't hear barking in the background, but
all good. It's the new norm, you know?
New norm. It really is. So yeah, so it's interesting, Garrett. I back in the long time ago, I was an actor, a theater major, musical theater, singer. That's sort of where I started, and then began to sort of dip my toe into teaching theater, directing shows, working at various camps and schools, and that eventually led me to get my master's in educational theater and English. It was sort of a dual program at NYU. And it drove me into teaching middle school English in public schools in New Jersey. And I really, really loved it. I really felt, interestingly, like my classroom was this bubble where we could experiment with personalized learning and new technology and allowing students to really drive their own learning. And it was sort of my little lab where I felt, like a new teacher, and I was, a little bit nervous, but I was experimenting with different things. And that propelled me into thinking about how technology empowers teachers and students to find their own voice and passions. And alt school at the time was just sort of starting. I don't know if we've discussed alt school before, but at the time it was a lab school for, allowing students to use personal interests and sort of meeting students where they were academically. And so I got so excited about alt school that I actually moved out to San Francisco for about 2 years.
Wow.
In alt school and worked there in some various roles for a while. I taught in a lab school. I taught 3rd through 5th grade. I worked on their product team in a lot of ways, and sort of taking feedback from users and teachers and talking to teachers about what works and what doesn't work in the learning product that we were developing. And then as we met, Garrett, I worked with our partner schools into how we can empower teachers in the classroom with technology to really allow students to find their voice. So I was at alt school for about 4 years. I loved it. I loved the team. I had my son, and then I played a couple of different roles. One which was at a company called Wonder School, which was a jump into early education.
I know Chris. Chris is a good dude. Yeah.
So as a new mom, it was really cool to think through sort of like, where would I want to send my child, and what does that learning environment look like? And so I worked to build some small schools in New York City. I moved back at that point. And then after about half a year there, I found an incredible team and an incredible role at Higher Ground. And I've been at Higher Ground for the last year, really just loving the work, loving the team, loving Montessori, and incorporating that into my personal life with my child as much as I can. And that's where we are. So I hope that was a helpful summary.
That was amazing. That's like if you were reading like exactly what I'm talking about. You get Wolverine #1 and you're like, oh, yeah. So on my side of things, on my perspective with Emily, is like the same thing. You had this company in alt school that was, you had all of these people that we never knew that each other existed in the country, where we're thinking like, man, the way things are going now just isn't working. And for me, I saw a TED Talk with Max Ventilla, the founder of the company, and he was the former director of personalization for Google. And so, I was kind of interested in tech in general and education, and never really kind of put it together. But, again, when you watch this really inspiring TED Talk, and I was like, man, and I was building a school at the time called Berthold Academy, where we were taking Montessori and kind of pulling it into the 21st century. It's a practice that's been around for about 100 years or more. And, saw this guy, Max, and was really inspired, and ended up, I told the story to, this is kind of, I think, part of why we started partnering up with Alt School, was because the story was hilarious. I had 8 kids in a townhouse. We were building a school out of it, and kind of figuring out how tech could be used with Montessori. And we thought very deeply about how can we take Montessori's philosophy, cloud base it, and then allow it to be accessible by many different educators to build kind of what, and this is where our aligned goals came in with Max, was like to have a network effect of getting better and the practice getting better over time. And ended up, filling out the application to be Alt School's first beta partner on a ferry in New York on an experiential learning trip, like trying to, and just sitting there with my phone. And this is like old school days when it wasn't that savvy,
right?
And filled the whole thing out with my phone. And then, that kind of started the conversation around Alt School and Berthold Academy, the first school I've ever founded.
It goes to show, Garrett,
what an amazing...
I was just going to say, you had to fill out that application. It was so exciting for you that it was like, I have to do it now on my phone with this, on this ferry. That was like that.
Well, because I knew, like in my head, you're so right. It was like there was an urgency.
Right.
There was an urgency to say, like, I got to get in there first. I have to be the first one in there because this is too good to be true. And the experience that I had, and I'm sure you can relate to from the alt school standpoint, and then we'll get on to kind of what's going on in your career right now, because I think higher ground education is doing some really like game changing things in regards to what school can look like for kids. So, when I started embedding myself in alt school and talking with Max and talking with Bart Medarata, who's an amazing brain in himself, and talking with all these really kind of all-star people in the tech game, you get super inspired to know that people are actually doing the work, the pain points, the heavy like work and lifting that it's going to take to actually fundamentally shift education to a successful platform. I think right now, kids in public school, I mean, even more so now, are at a detriment because, of this archaic kind of system. And so, the reason I call that out and the reason I talk about alt school is because it was a unique opportunity, and the first that I can even recall, where it pulled all of these like-minded educators into one space to have these amazing conversations and really the action behind those conversations. Everybody has ideas, right? But I think if you're not doing anything about it, they sit in a cloud of ideas and nothing ever happens. So that was what was really inspiring to me, for folks like you who we worked with, because, Emily was a partner lead, I believe, a partner success lead for a while, right?
Yeah.
And so we were talking a lot, and everybody that I talked to, from engineers to educators at alt school, was like, yep. Like it felt like I was just talking to myself in the mirror. And it helped me to feel not so crazy, because, when you're talking about these things and people are like, well, school's at desks and pencils, and you do this, and that's what school looks like. And folks like us were like, no, you're not down on the ground with actual learners seeing what's going on. So That was very long-winded, but I think it's helpful for our viewers to have some context into how you and I know each other.
Sure. The one thing I would add about alt school is that the teacher voice was at the top of the importance list, or at the top of the sort of the providing the feedback, the building the actual tools and the actual product. They said, hey, engineers are amazing and product managers are wonderful, but the teachers in the classroom really know what students are needing and what would make their lives easier. And, how can teachers spend their time doing the thing that, requires the heart and soul of being a teacher? And how can we take a technology product and take the feedback from educators and design it accordingly? So I really appreciated that about alt school, and I'm glad that you saw that as well, that these like-minded educators were really had their opinions and their perspective really valued.
Yeah, and I think for me it was the opportunity, and I'm sure you can relate too, is like I'm from the East Coast and you are too, I would imagine. And in a lot of ways, I hate to say this, but the East Coast is very institutional, just in general in the operate. I live in Northern Virginia, which is very government focused. We're right next to DC. Things just operate in a way that works for the masses. And to go out to, and even I've talked about this before on the show, but like to go out to a meeting with the former COO of Activision, who makes Call of Duty and all of this, Cody Johnson, and sit down, and I'm in a suit, right, thinking like whatever, and these guys are in jeans and sneakers at breakfast, and it helped me to understand like, oh, it does not matter all of this formality. What matters is what's going on right up here and us collaborating. And so it was this amazing opportunity for me to understand that, there shouldn't be this kind of pretentious ego when it comes to solving these big problems. It's got to be, let's get comfortable having these conversations. And so it was a really awesome, meaningful experience. So enough about that. I want to focus in on and talk a lot about, because obviously COVID and coronavirus, we've all dealt with it. I've had the virus. It's not fun. Yeah, my fiance had it, I had it, and my youngest daughter Fallon had it. And we have 5 kids in a blended family. So we've been doing good about, making sure nobody in the school, we haven't brought it in. We didn't even get it that way. But regardless of COVID, we've seen the clear need for support and shift in the way we educate children, as regardless if we're doing all this virtual learning and stuff, it's just not working. And there's other big things that are being pointed out. And what I love, so if Emily, you could tell us a little bit about Higher Ground Education, what your role is there, and what overall is the mission of this company.
Sure. So Higher Ground Education is a company that manages about 70 Montessori schools throughout the country. Also in China, we have several schools there. And we're growing pretty quickly, which is exciting. And the mission of the company, and particularly, Garrett, I think to a lot of what resonates with you, is to mainstream and modernize Montessori, to take Montessori and make it accessible to people all over the place, to parents, to working at home with your child, to children from infancy up through high school. So our programming does run in various schools from infancy through high school and everything in between. And to really understand what that looks like at each level, and to provide the support to parents and to how to continue that learning at home. So that was sort of the role that I jumped into as director of community, thinking through how we could create homes outside the homes, or the village that raises the child. How can a school be a place that feels like not just a place where you drop your child off in the morning and pick them up at the end of the day, but really a place where you feel that it's a sense of family, a place of learning, not just for your child, but for parents. And what we were finding is that many of the parents that were attending our schools this was their first time dropping their child off somewhere. They were brand new parents. They had infants and young toddlers, and they were really, really hungry for that community, and for other parents that were going through similar things. So how could we design programs that really fostered that stage of life for families? And that was kind of my thinking when I first joined. And of course, things have evolved. COVID has has been here for a while now. And so we did have to create some shifts and some additions, some really exciting additions to our programming. So that's sort of the backstory. That's what Higher Ground does. Our programming is called Guidepost Schools, Guidepost Montessori Schools. They run from 0 through elementary school, and then we have middle and high school called Academy of Thought and Industry.
Which I love.
It's so cool. And there's
some
shifts going on there as well, where we're doing this sort of hybrid, in-person, virtual, the child decides, it's a mixed model. That's very, very cool. And so that's the background of Higher Ground. And my role there. And then I can share more about some shifts that have happened in the past couple of months, but, in good time, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a little time. And, I used to, and this is so weird how our worlds connect, but, Emily and I kind of know each other in 2 routes, right? I used to work for a company called the Boyd School, and I managed a few of their schools. The Boyd School was bought by LaPorte Schools. And then LaPorte Schools was bought by, some of the locations were bought by Guidepost. Yeah. So now some of the same buildings that I worked in and operated in are now Guidepost Montessori schools.
As are alt schools, which is crazy too, because Guidepost bought several of the alt school locations out in California, in Brooklyn. And it's so interesting how, I guess that just goes to show the mainstreaming and modernizing of Montessori is
important. Yeah. And even having, Emily set me up with a great conversation with the CEO of her company, Ray Gurn. And we talked a lot about in our conversation, what something like an alt school platform, now altitude learning platform, could do for the modernizing Montessori. And, Ray had his ideas and I had mine, but, what I see is the action, right? As I see a lot of the at-home curriculum being kind of guided and structured within. And what an amazing player you would be in that company too, because one aspect of Guidepost and you're like, I know this platform like the back of my hand. Like, you need anything, just let me know. But I think, you and I specifically have kind of seen the way education could go and have worked diligently on what that path would look like. I think now with COVID, we're finally making that, we always have to experience a large amount of pain to shift and grow, right? And to kind of high level up our consciousness when it comes to education. And I think COVID caused that very quickly. And so, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk a little bit about, when Guidepost and Higher Ground in general that manages all these companies, when COVID happened, what was kind of your thought process at that point?
It's so interesting. So many of the things that we have eventually developed were things that we've been wanting to do. And I think COVID somehow resulted in a little bit of a push to get some things started that were really in the back of our minds and projects that we had been developing. So, when it first happened, of course, we responded quickly. We put down our schools and made sure that families felt supported in that transition. But then families were working at home and their children were at home. And I can imagine you had the same thing. I had the same thing. My 2-year-old, 1.5-year-old at the time was home. And, here I am in Zoom calls and speaking to other people at work. And I have a child at home. And what do we do? So we really jumped to productive action and thinking through how can we set up learning environments in the home? How can we support parents in the simultaneous work that you do? You're working and your child is working. And how can we set up the learning environments, provide examples of Montessori inspired activities and materials that you probably already have in the home? But the routines and practices that go around creating that kind of routine with your child at home. So we developed what we called a family framework, which was a lot of things. It was community where people could come and share ideas and chat. It was a whole host of content that we provided to families to be able to get those ideas into how to design that environment, how to set up, a small area for your child for their work in a Montessori aligned way, because Montessori, as you know, Garrett, translates so well into the home. And so this allowed us to really go there. And then we provided a number of not only parenting webinars and coaching for families in order to get that set up, but virtual network-wide circle times and Zumba classes and yoga classes, and it allowed children from all over the country to connect with each other and continue their learning. So that was one element of sort of the reaction to COVID. There were several others, one of which really impacts my role and that I've really been focusing on for the last 6 months. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Actually, prior to COVID, in about November, December, Higher Ground acquired a company called Cozykin, which was a Montessori nanny sharing service. It was based out of Boston. And we were really excited about bringing Montessori into the home, bringing Montessori care into the home for families who were looking for an alternative to sending their child to school for whatever reason. Maybe they were a young infant and a parent was really interested in a nanny or a nanny share where they would, provide socialization for the child because there would be 2 children or 3 children involved and 1 caregiver. And so what we did was we began to train nannies and caregivers in at-home Montessori. It was kind of a crash course in what do you need to care for a child in this, with this method behind you. So because of COVID, that sort of launched the whole new idea of learning pods or small group learning at home. And so we expanded Guidepost at Home to be able to meet the needs of families wanting to meet in small groups. We have what's called a matching map that allows families to see who's near them and who else is looking for care with what schedule. And then we hire and train educators to provide that care at home. Hopefully for the long run, right? This seems to be something that parents are really excited about, or when they're ready to transition back to school, we would support that as well. And so we also do really utilize our really strong, it's called our prepared environment team to set up the Montessori learning environment.
Speak my language. You're speaking my language.
I love it. So, and it's stuff that really does translate to parenting or parenting for independence. So, for instance, my son, instead of hoisting him up next to the sink and he's spraying water all over with his he has a stool with handles and he can wash his hands. And it's stuff like that. So, we've found a lot of parent demand, really excited about this new opportunity for at-home learning, and at-home learning in a Montessori aligned way where the teacher has a network of support, continued professional development through our training center, the Prepared Montessorian, if they'd like to go into a Montessori accreditation program where they can actually become a certified teacher. And that's just sort of one example of how this was something we were already doing, but it kind of shifted our focus into doing it, in a different way. And I think it's going really well. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, no, I think what I found in my career and working in a personalized learning and learner-centered, school system and creating curriculum and adapting school models and things, what I've learned is the reason why, for instance, when we partnered up with Alt School, we had a very difficult time getting buy-in from parents because no one even knew what Alt School was, even though I'm like super stoked on my end, like people get me. What I found is that a true shift in education has to come first with the parent, right? The parent has to be educated in understanding that, again, the educational view that we have can be totally different, because I think that here's what I'm trying to say. I think the biggest issue with the shift in education right now is the fact that we as adults, as parents, attach our own perspective to a child's education. And so we say like, well, why are you doing Common Core math like that when I did it like this? Well, because actually when you dive into that system, it's actually pretty darn efficient when it comes to solving math problems. So you have to think, I think the biggest problem is that, well, back in my day, and that is mediated or mitigated, if you will, with great educational experiences. And as you and I know, it's not a slideshow. It's not a presentation. It's an embodiment of the experience that gets there.
And I think seeing the difference in children and the difference in the outcomes of what happens when children are exposed to different types of learning, I think the proof is in the pudding a little bit.
100%.
So, at Alt School, for instance, we often didn't ask children to do traditional homework. And we got a lot of pushback from parents around, how can you not expect them to come home and do 2 or 3 hours of homework? But we did provide students with structures into how to spend their time and doing a passion project and getting excited and bringing that back to school and, managing their time. And when parents saw, the rise in executive functioning skills or students being able to make decisions, that's, I think, when they said, oh, okay, this is, you're doing this for a reason. This makes sense. So I agree with you.
Yeah. And I think what we've been really focusing on here at Creative Gardens is, I have my, I do primarily a lot of the marketing aspect of what we do. I'm kind of the brain, because we're a small scale operation right now. We do plan on scaling up, but when it comes to that, it's almost like you said, like, rather than me go all in on what we're doing educationally, what I do know is that parents at an early education age, they want two things first. One is they need to know that their child is loved, and they need to know that the care is authentic and true. And everything else is icing on the cake. The cake is that the child is truly cared for by educators that are invested in that child's education, that they have equity in it. And if you can come, like the way we kind of do it here is, we hire educators. We have a system of hiring educators to ensure that, to the best of our ability, that the educators that we hire have a sincere care and love for learning. And then everything else will speak for itself.
I was just going to add, one thing I think parents really value is when, along the line of caring and loving, when they really observe and really notice where children are and what they need. So when you say to a parent at pickup or at a conference, I noticed that your child was really loving hearing the story, but when they were reading it out loud, they start, whatever, I'm, giving an example.
Right.
But the parent says, I noticed the same thing. That's so interesting. And they begin to trust not only the teacher, but how they're teaching. And I think that the sort of really acute observations and sharing back with families and really strong communication is another thing that really helps in that, foundational relationship.
Yeah. And I think I'm sure you're finding as well too is, and I tell families when they come here is, look, I think a great education for your child is one that is a partnership between school and family. And the way we need to do that for us is to be transparent with you. However, you need to be transparent with us in giving us the meaningful conversations that we need to have in order to serve this child with a personalized, iterative education. I think that's really important. But if you, as an educator, or even as a school out there, if anybody out there is, running schools, the best thing to do is to just have honest, open conversations. Parents aren't idiots, and they see through a lot. And that's the problem that I have is you have a lot of schools out there that are promising the world and then completely under-delivering. They're really worried about the finances first. And, to even kind of go back to our previous conversation, it's like the reason why we were drawn to Alt School collectively was because we knew that the educators were speaking first. That was the loudest voice. Yeah. And that's authentic. And then obviously you're going to build an authentic product that's going to serve educators when educators are being authentic in what they need. So, I'm definitely seeing a shift. I mean, the positive thing about all of this, and there's a lot of positives, but 10 years, 8 years, 5, 6 years ago, when we were all vibing in Silicon Valley, this stuff seemed a little out there, right? Like we knew it worked. We knew that it wasn't crazy, but a lot of people did. But now you see a lot of schools using a Bright Wheel, using a Seesaw, using a Altitude Learning. Like it's happening.
It's happening. And it's interesting that you had the first thought of like, Montessori has been around for a really long time. And, people think of Montessori in a lot of different ways, but certainly as something that, is not brand new, but we're taking, some kind of empowering technology and adding that on top of something that has this long-standing historical, rightly so, curriculum and changing the way that it's used. And so in a lot of our schools now, and for our virtual program and for our, homeschooling program, which is a whole other thing, through COVID, we're using the Altitude platform to deliver Montessori curriculum so that really children can self-pace, parents can understand what children are learning, and we can use those kind of really powerful technologies to think of Montessori and other types of education in really new ways.
Yeah, and it's cool to watch it become more refined, because for me, it was really an idea to say, Montessorians, for those out there that don't know, like Montessori requires a lot of understanding of scope and sequence when it comes to actual materials and industry term apparatus in the classroom. So you're looking at, there's a start and a finish to every area of every Montessori classroom at every stage of development. So if you can imagine an educator needing to know, and as you know, Emily, now it's every lesson has a 3-page sheet on how to perform said lesson in a certain way. Now, what I was always thinking was there's definitely fog in here that can be cleared up. Like, we don't need all of the drawn out explanations and things, but more so for educators who, and what I love is what you previously said at the very beginning in your origin story, was that you come from a theater background. I feel that true inspired education, that true engagement point, that motivation point for learners, there has to be some theater involved from that educator. And so knowing that the focus needs to be on making meaningful moments in the classroom for educators, why are we, muddying up a teacher's time with flipping through all these albums to find the right lesson that comes after that lesson,
Exactly. And I hope that technology and the rethinking these practices really makes those changes. One thing that I think is interesting to bring up is, at least for Higher Ground, is the idea of this network effect and in the network of schools. And I know that you're building multiple schools too. And we're really hoping to almost blend the lines between school and home in several ways. Like I mentioned with ATI and the idea of being able to have a child have the autonomy, or a student at that point, an older student, decide sort of how they will attend school, from things like parents who want to travel and go on a business trip and don't want to sacrifice leaving their children at home. So how can we, make the classroom a place that feels familiar enough so that a child from New York can go on a trip with their parent and wind up in Dallas and attend another school, and oh wow, this is the same material that I use in my school. And so we're thinking about that modernization in a lot of ways, that being one of them. And now with COVID, of course, when so many parents are thinking about, well, now I'm providing school at home, I am the educator for my child. How can we give that parent the training, the support, the curriculum, the materials that they need in order to feel successful as a parent and as a teacher in this new form of learning in this new time?
Yeah, and first of all, I think that's amazing. I think, and again, I was really attracted to Higher Ground and what they're doing, because, it seems to be, again, this isn't practices that are just this is refined technology. This is a refined approach, just kind of marrying together because of COVID, and I think, and implemented because of COVID. But seeing how people, I think the biggest struggle, I think of what I was thinking of is parents coming into the building here at the school, and the initial thought is, one, I'm nervous to even send my child anywhere, right? And that's the first conversation. And of course, there's all these cleanliness practices and fogging the building constantly and doing all this stuff to make sure that that's happening. But to know that we as educators can provide some kind of relief for these families. I watch families every day. I mean, we're doing a program here called the GAP program, where we have kids come, Loudoun County Public School learners come, it's all virtual here. They're not doing any distant or any in-house learning whatsoever yet. And they're coming to our school in groups of 10 because we have the space. It's a micro school, so we're able to pull that off. We have learners coming, and we're really providing an executive function assist for these kids getting through their virtual learning environments. I've hired certified educators, and I've spent the past 2 weeks training them up in different kind of outside the box approaches to managing time, leveraging the technology we have, doing all of the things that we need to do to support learners. But the reason I call that out is because the number one thing that I see in the classroom when it comes to the parents is a sense of utmost relief. So that they don't have to watch their kid even further check the box like they do in normal public school, which is memorization, regurgitation. Now it's memorization, regurgitation without the human element. And so it's literally doing, if someone was to just do Khan Academy and only fly through everything in Khan Academy with no engagement of an educator, you would see the effect. There would be a high level of cognitive development and a low level of social emotional development. So I think, in providing relief for families, I think that's going to, like we were talking about experience, like how do we educate educate parents in a proper way? I think overall this year moving into it I think we're going to see a lot of that shift happen in parents and seeing that, approaches like higher ground, approaches like what we're doing are very effective when it comes to this type of situation. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, I really love the idea of in-person, facilitation or supplementing or, teaching different skills than children are learning virtually because they're not really interacting. They're not doing a lot of things that they'd be doing in school. So how can we, augment that so that we do provide those experiences? We have a similar program with our Guidepost at Home where parents are saying, my second grader has this virtual curriculum, but I need someone to be with them. I want someone in small groups or even privately to be able to take a look at what they're learning and apply that to something that's in person and to be able to say, oh, I noticed you struggled with this. Let me reinforce that for you. Come on over here. So I think it's very similar in a lot of ways. And I think it's very creative and necessary.
And I think what parents need to know, one is, we have Guidepost schools in Northern Virginia. Yeah. And I am always one, and Emily and I have talked about this, and even Ray and I talked about this a little bit too, is, in the past, and it sounds ridiculous, but it's true, you had schools, especially in our area, that were very competitive. And, there was this competitive aspect to it. Who's doing more? Who's doing the best? Whose parents are the happiest? Who has the most bumper stickers on cars? And I'm firmly in the belief that it's about moving that needle forward, and that the fact that we have multiple different kind of large scale companies that are pushing this needle really forward in a large way and really affecting a lot of people's lives. I mean, the exciting thing about alt school is it turned into altitude learning, and now they're in public school systems, large systems in California and abroad. They're in very large school systems operating in the same way, giving the tools that we've all used and in some ways helped develop now on a large scale. And I think the reason I call that out is we have Guidepost schools. I have probably one 20 minutes away from me, and I hope that people go there. I think that there are enough students in the world, and specifically in our area, to know that, like, for me, it's a win-win, right? If I can have kids come to my school, I know, of course, we're implementing a learner-centered curriculum. But if they want to go to Guidepost, and if you guys are at home, parents out there, and are struggling and are going, what the heck am I going to do with my kids? Like, Guidepost has, and specifically Guidepost and Higher Ground have amazing at-home options. So what does that kind of look like on an everyday for a student?
Yeah, it can look a lot of different ways right now.
Which I love, yeah.
Right? That's the whole point, that we want to meet the needs of parents and meet the needs of children. So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. So there are different options. So, of course, our schools are now open, which is exciting. And we're taking, of course, the safety precautions and all the things that we need to do to train our educators and our staff to make sure everybody is safe. And so our schools are open, but a lot of families don't feel comfortable sending their child to school just yet. And so we wanted to make a suite of offerings so that there's something for everybody. So first, as I mentioned, there is Guidepost at Home, which is quite literally Guidepost at home. It's bringing an educator into the home for private care, small group care, a Montessori educator who we personally train in a at-home capacity to how to set the classroom up, to how to deliver a lesson, how to provide meal time in a Montessori aligned way where the child is really preparing the meal or wiping down their seat. So we really do transfer the learning to at home. The second way is that we have a full virtual program, and it's a virtual school of small classrooms. So you really get to know the educator, you get to know the other teachers or the other students in the room. You're connecting with people across state lines. And it's a very, very popular option for families where they'd like a fully virtual program that's Montessori based. And so that is available. And then we also have our parent as educator, which is just as I described, a parent who's either a stay-at-home parent or would really like to now become a homeschooler for their own child or a small group of children. And we, just as we would provide training for guides, I keep saying guides, educators, right? So training for educators and guides, we provide that same training for parents and same support for parents. We have a service, it's very interesting. It's called Parent Concierge, and it was developed. I
love it.
It was developed right at the start of COVID when I was mentioning that family framework sort of content hub, where I took full advantage of it. A parent who has some parenting goals that they would like to meet in a Montessori aligned way. So how can my child transition from a sippy cup to an open cup? Or how can my child nap in a different way? Or anything that they're dealing with, setting up environments at home, providing activities to their children. So Parent Concierge is a way for families who are either stay-at-home parents or those homeschooling parents to receive the support so they're not in it alone. So that's a nice way for us to provide that connection and that community as well.
Yeah, because I think, God, it's so cool. Like a lot of these ideas, I'm like, man, if I would have had it, but and still can refine it. But
Sure.
you know, I'm really fascinated with the way that in which parents can be accessed and educated. I think what that does, again, I think the biggest wall that's thrown up with the shift in learning is the education of parents and families, because we're stuck in this institutional way. And I think what an amazing opportunity for a family now to be able to, I wish I had that when I was raising my, like you have the ability to say like, I almost, and I don't know how the UX works with that, but like, I almost envision like a chatbot to be able to go, hey, higher ground, da 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 da, like, and you get meaningful response from them. I just think that parents need support and help, because here's the biggest difference in us as parents versus our parents. The technological evolution it happens so much faster now than it ever has before, that we don't really know ultimately what we're preparing our kids for in the future.
I agree.
Yeah. So what I would say is it's important that folks whose job it is to be up on the latest in education, to be up on what's important for kiddos and how to raise kiddos and how to properly discipline them and how to implement mindfulness and things like that. Like parents now have the access to a iterative experience to learn more about how to raise their kids, which will ultimately, I think, again, raise that consciousness when it comes to our kids in society.
And so interestingly, we're now thinking about how we can involve expecting parents before they have children. And, you go to some of these websites where it says your baby's the size of a lemon or whatever. But how can we, with a Montessori mind, talk to parents who are expecting new babies, who don't know and who are open to lots of different ideas and different methods. And I really felt when I found Montessori, as my child was a young toddler, that it was the closest thing to like a parenting handbook. And there were answers to questions that I had. And
For sure.
In a lot of different ways, from things to buy to what to look for in a pediatrician, to how to engage my child in interacting with other children, lots of things. So I think involving parents from the very beginning can only be helpful. And to be honest, most of the content that we offer is just available. We want to be able to provide that, to be able to mainstream these ideas to the point where we just hope parents join our Facebook group and chat a little bit and tell us what they're experiencing at home and ask questions. And so there are lots of ways that we're just making, like you're saying, this accessible and available. So these ideas are available to everybody.
Yeah, and that's the inception of At the Gardens. This show is I want to be able to, even on a micro scale, right? Because I'm worried really about a micro local market for my schools. So, to be able to connect with my community and inform them on the fact that school doesn't have to look the way it's always looked, right? Like, it's so funny when you talk with parents and you talk with elementary school parents, and they're really trying to work out this home environment for their kids. And all, if not, I would say most, I won't put the definitive of all on there, but most of these environments is like a desk, a organizer here, folders here, everything like it used to look when we went to school. And I said, a lot of the times I say, well, why does it have to look like that?
Right.
Why can't it just be a laptop on the couch? And that's where the child needs to be at that time. So why can't we just open up our eyes to say school doesn't have to look like the institutionalized version that we're all used to?
Exactly. And a lot of I totally agree. And I'm just thinking about the home setups that I've seen. And I agree with you. Many have, there's like a picture of their dog and some other nice things to make it nice and homey, but it's a replication of school. So, I mean, and what we're thinking through, and we always felt this way at Alt School too, that, children don't necessarily learn the best when they're looking at a screen all day. And that's not the point. The point is to be able to provide them the upfront instructions, directions, prompts, and inspiration to go and apply that to something in real life and to really develop that on their own with others. With an educator, with a parent, and then to come back and share and discuss. So I think the environment it's so blended, right? How can we make the home environment a really welcoming and supportive place for learning? And yeah, of course, who needs to sit at a desk? I'm standing up right now, which I really like.
I just purchased a stand-up desk, a converted desk, so I can put it anywhere and then be able to stand up. But what I would say too to that is, it's so funny. In Montessori, you have classrooms that you want them to be extensions of the home, right? Like that is the conversation that I would have with so many parents as educators. You want the classroom to look like the home and the home to look like the classroom. Well, 2 and 2 together, the classroom is the home.
Yeah.
And the home is the classroom. So the more real world we can make experiences for kiddos, even at an early age, the better we're preparing them for the future in which they're coming. Again, this whole model was built around preparing kids for factory education. And so it's not that world anymore. We have these. I mean, I can talk to you on a show virtually. You're in New Jersey, I'm here, and it's somewhat seamless, somewhat.
No,
so yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, even the idea of, like in Montessori, practical life starting as young as infancy, really.
Yep.
My son James is learning how to pour from a little pitcher into his glass instead of using a sippy cup, as I mentioned. And those practical life skills, we teach them in the classroom, but we hope that parents teach them at home and encourage their students to continue at home, cleaning up their dishes, being able to self-serve breakfast. Those are all practical life skills, but that will eventually propel them into learning, more academic things. Like, as I know, one of my favorite Montessori things in a children's house classroom is the washing the table, where the children have, I think it's like a 50 or 60 step process where a 3-year-old has to go and get soap and a bucket and a sponge. And then they know in order how to wash a table. And of course, for a child, that's so fun, right? There's soap, there's water, it's great, but they're moving left to right. And they're moving in circles. So it's teaching those sort of like early literacy foundations where they're moving their eyes in a certain way. And of course the child doesn't know that, but the practical life of doing these things that are routine can really embed, larger principles that will be applicable not only on an executive functioning level, of course, but at an academic level.
Yeah, and I think the scaffolding, I talk a lot about scaffolding in education and how important that is. And of course, now we're doing a lot of back engineering, reverse engineering in education. But I think Montessori was the first person out there, what a genius lady this lady was, to be able to build this scaffolding of these aha moments, like you said, like a child that does table washing work, yes, they are learning to kind of even, when they're taking the sponge and they're scrubbing, they're doing these circle moments, but then they're actually, getting the excess off, going top to bottom, left to right. Again, like you said, training the brain, that's not an innate skill. It's learned. And if you can have these aha moments, if you can imagine, if a child is not being sat down to say, when you read, move your head left to right, like they're having these aha inspirational fire driven moments that are continuing the intrinsic motivation to learn that they're born with. Like that's where you look at Montessori as a game changer, is like she saw that kids' brains kind of build upon these scaffoldings. And if you can structure an environment where a child feels that this is their path and that they've created their path, imagine the world. Imagine the world of such self-aware, motivated learners that have a lifelong love of learning.
Exactly. And if we can set up parents, and this comes back to the community thinker in me, if we can set up parents to know about those things and educate them to be able to find the same value and continue them at home, then there isn't such a break between school and home. It's, the learning is consistent and fluid.
Yeah, and and even a Montessori classroom, the originals were casas, so houses, small houses. So you think about it's the shift is happening. And folks like Emily Greenburg are there making it happen. Her company that she is out here prophetizing for is Higher Ground Education. Emily, we're going to wrap up here. It's been awesome. I know that I plan on in the future I want to do some forums. So I would love to have you back on with some of the other guests that have been on the show to kind of go back and forth around what education can look like.
Love it.
If people want to find you personally, business-wise, of course, and then Higher Ground, where's the best places they can do so?
Sure. I would direct them directly to guidepostmontessori.com, and all of our affiliate, or I shouldn't even say affiliate, all of our supplemental programs, of course, our schools, our at-home program, our virtual program, our homeschooling program are all available through that one hub. So I would absolutely direct them to guidepostmontessori.com. If anybody is interested in being in touch with me personally, they're more than welcome to. It's a little bit of a weird email, Garrett, but I'm going to go for it.
Go for it.
It's long. It's E. Greenburg, my first initial last name, at tohigherground.com. The word spelled out. So E. Greenburg, tohigherground.com. You're welcome to be in touch with me if you have any questions, thoughts, ideas. I would love it.
That's awesome. And I'll go ahead and throw that in the comment section so everybody can find that. And yeah, please do, because Emily is a super smart girl and out there just killing it in the education game. And thank you so much for everything that you've done.
It's so great to chat and, talk about this stuff with somebody so like-minded and so inspirational. So Garrett, thank you. And I hope to be back soon.
Yeah, thanks so much. We're going to have Emily jump off. Thanks again. And that being said, my friends, thank you so much for joining me here at the Gardens. I continue to have really awesome guests on, and Emily is no different. What an amazing conversation we just had. Again, if you guys want to check out some options for your kids at home that potentially are struggling or having a tough time, or you as parents are having a tough time dealing with COVID, reach out to them. They've got some great solutions. You're absolutely welcome to reach out to me too. My email is garrett@creativegardensva.com. We look forward to talking with Emily soon. That being said, have a fantastic weekend. It's Labor Day. Enjoy your Monday. Spend it with your kids. Even though you probably had a lot of time with your kids, spend some quality time with them doing what they love, not what you love, what they love. It's really important. And as always, keep your head up and keep moving forward. We will see you on Tuesday for some more At the Gardens. Take care, guys.